A catastrophic earthquake in the Pacific Northwest would topple buildings and bridges, not to mention the damage from a tsunami.
However, it is a critical reminder to be prepared for a big earthquake here, which they say could happen anytime.
The Pacific Northwest has long stood as a silent sentinel against the roaring power of the Pacific Ocean. Stretching along the coastline, Oregon's lush, rugged landscape belies a hidden threat lurking beneath the ocean floor. Recently, scientists have sounded a chilling red alert after confirming detailed tsunami risk zones along the Oregon coast. These newly identified zones, created through advanced geological surveys and updated seismic modeling, are causing serious concern, not just within the scientific community, but among state officials, emergency management agencies, and coastal residents. Before we start, smash the like and subscribe buttons for more updates. This warning is not born from speculation. The data that underpins the alert stems from deep-sea seismic analysis and simulations of tectonic movement along the Cascadia subduction zone. This boundary, where the Juan de Fuca plate dives beneath the North American plate, has long been known as a potential source of catastrophic earthquakes and resulting tsunamis. What makes the latest findings particularly alarming is the clarity and precision with which specific tsunami inundation zones have been mapped out. These are not vague regions marked by general risk. They are well-defined geographic locations, towns, neighborhoods, transportation corridors, where the waves are projected to hit hardest if a major seismic event occurs. Unlike some natural hazards that develop gradually, a tsunami strikes with terrifying immediacy. And in the case of Oregon, the warning time after a massive offshore earthquake could be as little as 10 to 15 minutes. That's not enough time for large-scale evacuations, not enough time to gather essentials, and certainly not enough time to save lives if preparations haven't already been made. This fact alone is what has propelled the recent alert into headlines. It's not merely that the zones have been mapped, it's that the people living within those zones are now acutely vulnerable if proactive measures are not taken. The red alert issued by scientists represents a categorical shift in the way the region must think about disaster preparedness. It's no longer a theoretical risk. It's an imminent one, with the data to back it up. The threat is compounded by the geography of Oregon's coastal towns, many of which are located at or near sea level with limited roadways leading inland. In some areas, the topography rises only gradually, offering few options for rapid elevation gain in the event of a tsunami. In others, the road infrastructure itself could be destroyed or rendered impassable by the quake that precedes the tsunami, trapping residents in the path of the incoming wave. Moreover, the researchers have emphasized how the composition of the coastline influences the force and reach of a tsunami. Narrow bays, river mouths, and estuaries can funnel wave energy further inland, turning what might otherwise be moderate flooding into a full-blown inundation. Even more unsettling is the realization that some of the most popular and populous towns along the Oregon coast, places like Seaside, Newport, and Coos Bay, are directly within high-risk zones. These towns not only have permanent populations, but also attract thousands of tourists each year, especially during the summer months. Tourists, often unfamiliar with tsunami protocols or local evacuation routes, pose an added layer of vulnerability during a crisis. The modeling used to determine these risk zones has grown far more sophisticated in recent years, leveraging satellite data, underwater sonar mapping, and sediment core analysis to create dynamic simulations of how a tsunami would behave upon striking the shore. These simulations have been able to predict not only the height and force of the first wave, but also the number and spacing of subsequent waves, each of which could be just as destructive. In some scenarios, the water doesn't recede fully between waves, creating a sustained flood effect that can last for hours. The devastation from such a scenario would be unprecedented for this region. Urban planners and emergency managers have been quick to respond to these revelations. But as scientists have pointed out, infrastructure changes take time, often years, while the geological threat could manifest at any moment. This disconnect between the urgency of the risk and the pace of preparation is one of the most critical issues facing Oregon today. Schools, hospitals, nursing homes, and other vital institutions within tsunami zones must consider the feasibility of vertical evacuation structures or even relocation. For some, the cost is prohibitive. For others, political or logistical inertia makes rapid action difficult. But the science is unequivocal. Without adaptation, lives are at risk. Even more concerning is the psychological impact of the red alert on residents of the newly designated high-risk zones. For many, this is the first time they've had to seriously consider the possibility of being caught in a deadly natural disaster. The mental burden of this knowledge is heavy. Homeowners wonder if their properties will lose value. Parents worry about the safety of their children's schools. Businesses contemplate how to protect their assets and employees. The sudden clarity of the danger has shifted the tone of public discourse from cautious optimism to sobering realism. Beyond immediate emergency concerns, the risk zones also bring long-term implications for how Oregon approaches coastal development. Building codes may need to be rewritten. Zoning laws could change. Entire neighborhoods might eventually be designated as unsuitable for habitation. These are deeply disruptive changes that would affect property values, tax revenues, and the social fabric of many small communities. Yet they may be necessary to ensure future generations are not put at the same risk. The red alert has also reignited debate over the need for early warning systems and earthquake detection technology. Currently, the Pacific Northwest has limited infrastructure in place for real-time earthquake and tsunami warnings. Advances in seismic sensors and AI-based modeling could buy residents precious seconds, perhaps a minute or two if implemented broadly. While it's not a complete solution, every second counts when evacuating an area under threat. Japan's experiences with tsunami early warning systems after the 2011 Tohoku earthquake have shown that even modest improvements in alert timing can dramatically increase survival rates. Educational campaigns are being ramped up as well, with schools and communities hosting tsunami drills, evacuation route walkthroughs, and public information sessions. But a major challenge remains in reaching non-resident populations, especially tourists who may not speak English or be familiar with emergency signage. Oregon's appeal as a scenic, tranquil getaway could quickly turn into a liability during a sudden natural disaster. This has led to calls for multilingual signage, mobile alert systems tailored for travelers, and more robust public address capabilities in parks and coastal recreation areas. Scientists have also warned that climate change could exacerbate the effects of a future tsunami. Rising sea levels, already a concern for many coastal regions, reduce the buffer between the normal tide line and infrastructure. A tsunami that might have just reached the edge of a neighborhood a decade ago could now surge several blocks further inland. This amplifies the need for forward-looking strategies that account not just for today's risks, but for tomorrow's realities. The red alert further underscores the importance of regional cooperation. A tsunami does not recognize city limits or county lines. A major event in the Cascadia subduction zone would likely trigger widespread damage across several states and provinces. Oregon, Washington, and British Columbia must work together to standardize response protocols, share data, and pool resources. Coordination with federal agencies like FEMA and NOAA is also essential, particularly when it comes to disaster recovery and resource mobilization. Economically, the alert brings both challenge and opportunity. On one hand, insurance premiums for coastal properties could skyrocket, and some insurers may even begin to refuse coverage in high-risk zones. This could depress real estate markets and push residents inland. On the other hand, the urgency of the threat could drive investment in resilient infrastructure, such as tsunami-resistant buildings, improved evacuation routes, and better communications technology. There's also potential for the growth of industries focused on disaster readiness, from emergency supply manufacturing to public safety consulting. As Oregon stands on the brink of what may become a generational shift in its relationship with the coast, the message from scientists is unmistakable. Now is the time to act. The natural beauty and serenity of Oregon's coastal towns have always drawn people to live, work, and play near the sea. But this serenity hides a powerful, indifferent force. The Cascadia subduction zone will not ask for permission to rupture. The ocean will not apologize for reclaiming land. The only defense is preparation, grounded in science, executed with resolve, and maintained with vigilance. Local governments are beginning to reckon with these realities. Some towns have already initiated projects to build vertical evacuation towers, elevated platforms designed to provide temporary refuge above the projected wave height. Others are reevaluating their land use policies, debating whether future development should be allowed in zones now labeled as high risk. These are not easy decisions. They come with political, financial, and emotional consequences. But what the red alert does is strip away any illusion that the danger is distant or hypothetical. It is real, measurable, and dangerously overdue. Residents of Oregon now face a critical crossroads. They can choose complacency, hoping that the fault line remains quiet for another few decades. Or they can use this scientific warning as a call to action, to reinforce homes, update school emergency plans, teach children what to do, and make community resilience a shared goal. There is no one-size-fits-all solution. Each town, each neighborhood, each family must assess their unique circumstances and make choices accordingly. Yet despite the grim nature of the red alert, there is a strange kind of hope embedded within it. Knowledge, even knowledge of risk, is power. It's better to understand the threat and prepare than to be caught unaware. Scientists have delivered their message with clarity and urgency. They've provided the data, the maps, the projections. Now it's up to policymakers, educators, engineers, and everyday citizens to decide what comes next. The land will shake, the sea will rise. But what happens in the hours, days, and years leading up to that moment will determine the scale of loss and the strength of the response. Oregon's red alert is not just a warning, it's a challenge. One that demands courage, planning, and above all, respect for the forces of nature that shape our world. As the red alert reverberates through Oregon's coastal communities, another layer of complexity begins to unfold. How to adapt and survive in a region defined by its proximity to both beauty and danger. The tsunami risk zones now made visible by scientists have sparked a deep and wide-ranging shift in how residents, businesses, and local leaders think about the land they inhabit. The risk is no longer a shadow lurking beneath the waves. It is charted, quantified, and immediate. With the clarity of danger comes the necessity of planning, urban, social, and even psychological. One of the most pressing concerns now is the question of relocation. Should certain vulnerable neighborhoods be encouraged or even required to move? In places where entire subdivisions fall within inundation zones, the prospect of relocating is not only disruptive but emotionally devastating. Homes that have been in families for generations, landmarks of local identity, and thriving small businesses all stand in harm's way. Yet the harshness of the new data makes inaction increasingly indefensible. Some municipalities have begun discussions around creating buyout programs, funded through a mix of state and federal grants, to incentivize relocation from high-risk coastal areas to safer ground. While such programs have been used in flood-prone areas across the U.S., applying them to tsunami zones is relatively new and politically fraught. Property rights, community bonds, and local economic stability all stand in opposition to the idea of giving up land to the sea, even if science suggests it may eventually be necessary. The local economies of Oregon's coastal towns are built not just on the resilience of their residents, but also on industries deeply tied to the water: fishing, shipping, tourism, and recreation. Each of these economic pillars faces disruption in the wake of the red alert. Ports, harbors, and waterfront facilities are now being reevaluated for their structural vulnerability. In many places, these economic hubs sit squarely within the newly defined inundation zones. If a tsunami were to strike, the destruction of docks, fish processing plants, and commercial facilities could send shockwaves through regional supply chains. Tourism, in particular, finds itself walking a fine line. On one hand, the natural beauty of Oregon's coast continues to draw millions of visitors. On the other, there is a growing awareness that the very attractions that make the coast appealing, beaches, scenic overlooks, and oceanfront lodging, are now understood to be high-risk zones. Some towns are beginning to contemplate how to present this information to tourists without inciting fear or deterring visits. It's a delicate balance between transparency and reassurance, safety and hospitality. A crucial step toward managing this risk lies in the physical transformation of the landscape. Infrastructure is the frontline defense in a tsunami event, and Oregon's coastal communities are not currently built to withstand such an assault. Roads may crack or collapse during the earthquake that triggers a tsunami, and even if they remain intact, many evacuation routes are narrow, winding, and poorly marked. To address this, some towns are investing in the widening and elevation of key roadways. These are not just roadworks. They are lifelines. In tandem, vertical evacuation structures are gaining traction as a practical solution where horizontal evacuation is not feasible. These engineered platforms, often designed as towers or elevated buildings, offer a last refuge when time and terrain limit the ability to flee inland. These structures must be built to withstand both the earthquake and the immense hydraulic force of a tsunami wave. Funding, design approval, and community engagement are all significant hurdles, but for towns hemmed in by geography, they may be the only viable option. Another underappreciated aspect of tsunami readiness is communication. When an earthquake hits, systems need to transmit accurate information quickly across a variety of channels. Sirens, cell broadcasts, radio alerts, and digital signage all play a role. However, gaps in service, outdated hardware, or inconsistent messaging can erode public trust and effectiveness. To combat this, some communities are experimenting with mesh network technology that allows devices to communicate even when traditional infrastructure is offline. Others are working to integrate tsunami alert protocols into wearable technology, like smartwatches, to deliver urgent messages directly to individuals. The role of schools and educational institutions in this new reality cannot be overstated. Beyond conducting drills, schools must serve as hubs of awareness and action. Curricula are being adapted to include age-appropriate education on earthquakes and tsunamis. This isn't just about safety, it's about building a generation that understands the land beneath their feet and how to live with its rhythms. In many districts, school buildings themselves are being assessed for retrofitting or relocation to safer zones, especially those that double as emergency shelters during disasters. What's striking about the response to the red alert is how deeply interdisciplinary it has become. This is not simply a geological issue. It's an urban planning dilemma, a logistical challenge, an engineering puzzle, and a psychological reckoning. Architects are now exploring tsunami-resistant building designs that deflect or absorb the energy of incoming waves. Mental health professionals are offering counseling and resilience-building workshops to residents experiencing anxiety about the threat. Emergency responders are training for scenarios that combine multiple disasters: quake, flood, landslide, and fire. Insurance providers, meanwhile, are recalculating their risk assessments. Properties within newly identified tsunami zones face potential increases in premiums or the outright withdrawal of coverage. For homeowners and business owners, this adds a financial burden on top of the existential risk. Some are pushing for the creation of state-sponsored risk pools or disaster insurance funds that could help offset these costs while ensuring broader coverage. Such financial tools are essential to fostering long-term adaptation rather than short-term panic. As more data pours in, scientists are also beginning to refine the timeline of risk. The Cascadia subduction zone operates on a cycle of approximately 250 to 500 years between major events. The last massive quake and tsunami occurred in 1700. That puts the region in the statistical window for recurrence. While no exact prediction can be made, every year that passes without a rupture is one more tick on a geological clock nearing its next alarm. This ticking timeline underscores the urgency behind the red alert, not to instill fear, but to galvanize readiness. Technology plays an expanding role in managing the complexities of this threat. GIS, Geographic Information Systems tools, are being used to create dynamic real-time maps that visualize not only inundation zones but also the location of vulnerable populations, emergency resources, and transportation bottlenecks. These maps are increasingly available to the public, offering residents and visitors alike the opportunity to understand their personal risk profiles and make informed decisions. Mobile apps are also being developed to guide users to the nearest evacuation point during an emergency, combining GPS, local data, and emergency alerts in one interface. Yet with all this data and technology, the human element remains central. Community resilience does not arise from software alone. It is built on relationships, knowledge sharing, and trust. Volunteer response teams, local leaders, and neighborhood watch groups are stepping up to coordinate preparedness efforts, from hosting training sessions to distributing emergency kits. Faith communities, civic clubs, and nonprofits are playing their part as well, turning places of gathering into places of refuge and readiness. The arts and cultural sectors have even found a place in the broader response. In some communities, Local artists are creating murals, plays, and installations that depict the history of tsunamis in the region, the power of nature, and the courage of preparedness. These cultural expressions help make the threat feel more tangible and less abstract. They also offer a powerful way to process the emotional weight of living under constant potential threat. In the long term, the red alert forces Oregon to ask fundamental questions about sustainability. Can a community thrive in a known danger zone indefinitely? What balance should be struck between honoring the past and protecting the future? How can equity be ensured so that low-income residents are not left most exposed to harm? These are not merely scientific or technical questions. They are moral ones requiring inclusive dialogue and courageous leadership. If you liked this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, leave your comments below and tell us, what are your thoughts on Oregon's tsunami risk zones being identified now? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.